Thanks, Gloria. This is the first of seven talks. And our first is going to be done by Margaret Ann. I just want to tell you that Margaret Ann will speak for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes, and she'll set a question. And thereafter, we'll come back for a plenary. But during the talk, I'd really appreciate if anybody has a comment to make or a question to ask, please put it in the chat for two reasons. A, it's a record for us, but B, you won't forget them once you have it in the chat, and that would help Margaret Ann when we come back to the plenary. So, in the summer of 2020, Prime Minister Boris Johnson appointed a commission on race and ethnic disparities to examine why so many disparities persist and what can be done to eliminate or mitigate them. The commission was specifically tasked to look at race and ethnic disparities in education, in employment, in crime and policing, and in health. The Commission's report was published on the 31st of March 2021, with headlines saying that the UK should be seen as an international exemplar of racial equality, and that there was no evidence of institutional racism. Of course, the report met with a chorus of criticism from reputable sources. We too share many of these criticisms. So we were waiting with interest the government's response to the report. Inclusive Britain, the government's response to the report of the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities was published on the 17th of March this year. Margaret Ann will now give us a presentation on this and her response to the original report. Margaret Ann.
Thank you. Thank you, Yogi, and thank you all for being here. I think this is a really important topic, and it can be a very emotive topic. And certainly when the initial report from the Commission for Racial and Ethnic Disparities came out, I'm going to call it the CRED report, there was a lot of emotion that surrounded it. Now, I'm going to refer to it as the CRED report. It's popularly known as the Sewell report because Dr. Tony Sewell was the chairman, but I'm trying to sort of depersonalize it a little bit. So I will refer to it as the CRED report. I have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, but because of the combination of my lack of technical skills and my computer, which is giving me some headaches, Gloria is going to share her screen with you and put up my presentation. So while Gloria is doing that, I want to say a couple of things. Before I talk about the response, I'd like to say a couple of things about the initial report, the CRED report. As Yogi said, it was met with a chorus of criticisms, and there were a number of reasons for that. I would just like to briefly mention two of them, which I think are, if not the most important, certainly amongst the most important. But before I do that, I want to make something clear. The CRED report was, although it was popularly referred to in the media as a government report or a number 10 report, it was a government commissioned independent report. So as that, it has no legal standing on its own. The response to the report, Inclusive Britain, which I will be speaking about, has the weight of governmental authority behind it. So that is really the one that matters. But the one that got a lot of media attention was the CRED report. And two of the areas in which it was highly criticized were first, the lack of empiricism in gathering data. And when a consultation was called, when the commission was announced, more than 2,000 individuals and more than 300 organizations responded to the call for evidence. And after the report was submitted, a considerable number of those respondents said that they had used terms such as systematic, systemic, structural, institutional, internalized, inherent, and cultural racism to indicate, to communicate what they thought to be one of the major causes of the ethnic disparities that were being investigated. Not one of those words came through. So there was a general feeling that there was really, somehow the data that was gathered was not really reflected in the report. And some experts came out and said, I was misquoted, or I was taken out of context. There was a lot of unhappiness about the presentation of the data. So the other thing, and this is, I think, possibly the most important criticism that came out of it, as Yogi said, they quoted that there was no evidence of institutional racism in the country. So this is problematic for so many reasons. I'm going to take you back a little bit, like Stephen Lawrence's death in 1993, and I'm sure you all remember this, just to refresh your memories, prompted the 1998 inquiry by Sir William Macpherson. And Macpherson examined the investigation into Stephen's death and ruled that the Metropolitan Police Force and other police forces and institutions, but he was dealing specifically with the Met, were institutionally racist. This was considered a landmark thing at the time. It was when and the original name of the report, although we know it as the Macpherson report, was the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report. And Sir William Macpherson asked that it be continued to be known as the Stephen Lawrence inquiry report. And anytime he spoke about it, he spoke about it that way because he wanted it to stay in people's minds. But it is now known as the Macpherson report. But it was considered one of the most important moments in the modern history of criminal justice in Britain. And up to that point, institutional racism had been question mark, does it, doesn't it exist? And from this point forward, people started to say, yes, in the discourse, it was taken for granted, yes, institutional racism is a thing. So, and it was very much a fringe perspective if you denied the existence of institutional racism. Sadly, the CRED report gives some credibility, is given legitimacy to the idea that institutional racism is not a thing in the UK. And that makes the work for those of us who work on these issues, that bit more difficult, because now we have to restate and reaffirm the framework within which all of this is happening. So Stephen Lawrence's mother, Doreen Lawrence, said, and I quote, "When I first heard about the report, my first thought was that it had pushed the fight against racism back for 20 years or more. She also said in a subsequent interview that it had given the green light to racists." So it was devastating for a lot of people who worked on these issues. And even Boris Johnson seemed to be sort of distancing himself from it, although it was a government-appointed commission. And at the time that it was produced, a spokesperson said, and I quote, "The Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities has now been published. The government will respond to the recommendations in due course." So we all know in due course covers a multitude. So we were waiting to see when or even if this response would come. And I think it was the fact that it came almost to the date, a year after the CRED report was published, I think was a good thing, and it was met with a mixture of caution, but at least relief that something had come out. And I will say that I think there was general cautious optimism that greeted it, because many things in the original report seemed to be almost trying to trigger a culture war. And this was much more tame and balanced. Oh, Gloria, I'm sorry. Can you, forgetting about my slides. Gloria, can you put the slides forward, please? So yes, that is Dr. Tony Sewell, who is the chairman of the report. Yes. So yes, the report put forward 24 recommendations, and the words that they used, the aims for their overarching aims, are very noble aims, you know, to build trust, to promote fairness, to create agency, to achieve inclusivity. But the actual way the report was worded didn't seem to fulfill those aims. Next one, please, Gloria. And this was a controversial bit. And this was in Dr. Sewell's foreword to the report. Put simply, we no longer see a Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. The impediments and disparities do exist. They are varied, and ironically, very few of them are to do directly with racism. Next one, please. The evidence shows that geography, family influence, socioeconomic background, culture, and religion have more significant impact on the life chances than the existence of racism. Okay, that said, we do take the reality of racism seriously, and we do not deny that it is a real force in the UK. But he did deny that institutional racism. So what he's saying is interpersonal racism exists, but institutional racism is not a real factor. Next slide, please, Gloria. Okay, so this is the report we're going to be discussing now. And as I say, it was met with general optimism, but as is often the case with government reports, the devil is in the detail, and we're still awaiting the details of the proposals that were set out in this report. So I'm going to outline a few of the recommendations that are in this report, as well as some of the difficulties in implementing some of those recommendations. But first, Gloria, next slide, please. This is Kemi Badenoch. She is the Equalities Minister, the Tory Equalities Minister, and she's the one who presented the report. And the next slide, please, Gloria. So here's what she says. Inclusive Britain sets out a raft of measures to translate the finding from the Commission's report, the Commission being the CRED report, into concrete action. In doing so, we've considered and responded to each of the report's 24 recommendations, in some cases going even further than the report envisaged, which is very true. They came up with like 72 or something as opposed to the 74. Inclusive Britain is a comprehensive plan that details 74 actions right across government, which together will put us on a course towards a more inclusive and integrated society. So they say. The action plan outlined below provides a template for the rest of the public sector. So they're saying, we have got it right. This is what we're doing, but we think the rest of the public sector, as well as businesses, charities, and individuals, should work towards doing what we are doing. Kemi says they're going to report back in 12 months' time and on the progress they've made in delivering these actions. So at the moment, we're in a bit of a wilderness in that nothing has yet been delivered. We have the written indication of what is going to be delivered, and we will have an update in 12 months' time. Okay, so I'm going to just deal with a few of the things that are in the report. Gloria, next slide, please. BAME. Okay. To communicate more effectively on racial issues and to avoid lumping together different ethnic minority groups, the government has stopped using the term BAME in its own communications, and will encourage other public sector bodies to do the same. Next, please. Okay. In the past, there was a logic to say it's segregating groups in this way. Now, essentially what it's saying is that, and this was a recommendation of the original commission, that they stop using BAME in cases where they need to have a collective term. It will be ethnic minority communities. I believe very strongly, and I'm starting with this just essentially to get it out of the way, because I think we've all pondered and worried about what to say, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. Will we get it wrong if we use this terminology or another? And I am someone who believes unequivocally that language matters and that terminology matters. But language is always changing. It's a fluid thing. And we could spend the next 3 days sitting here together discussing what terminology we should use to describe ourselves and others, and we probably still wouldn't agree. So essentially, any terms or categorizations are going to be problematic. And I think there's obvious utility in having a collective term for people of color or for non-white people, but I think there are more important issues. I mean, I think I don't know if we will ever agree on this. But I do think it's important, although a collective noun or a collective phrase is probably helpful. I think it's important, both conceptually and analytically, to look at different groups who fall within any heading. And it's important to look at the experiences of different groups to get an understanding of what's happening. So, for example, we can say Black. I'm very comfortable with the term Black. I use it. I refer to myself as Black. But there's a vast difference between the experience of Black West Indians and Black Africans. The term Asian, there's a vast difference in the experience of South Asians and East Asians. And I think we just have to be careful and sensitive in the language that we use. And I think also context matters. A term will be relevant in some contexts and not so much in another context. Now, some people felt that this was a distraction, that it was something the government could say, yay, look at us. But and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it is just something that I'm not sure there will ever be consensus about. So yeah, it'll go on and on and on. Next slide, please, Gloria. So, oh, sorry. Okay, next one. We can skip that one. I forgot about that one. Okay, so one of the areas in which this response says we will take action is in the teaching of history and other subjects. And included in and other subjects is English, I think, is the other one they're targeting to be broadened, for the curriculum to be broadened. And this is from the report, to help pupils understand the intertwined nature of British and global history and their own place within it. The DFE will look with history curriculum experts, historians, and school leaders to develop a model history curriculum by 2024 that will stand as an exemplar for a knowledge-rich, coherent approach to the teaching of history. Now that all sounds great. The stated intention is to set up a panel to look into this, but we've been given no indication, no information regarding who would comprise membership of this panel. And, you know, we hope that once this panel is in existence, that the history of colonialism and empire are not somehow watered down, filtered into something else. And there are two main reasons, I think, that people are skeptical about whether this will be effective. One of them is that in 2020, in October 2020, Kemi Badenoch spoke in the House of Commons and said that the teaching of CRT in schools, critical race theory, in schools without giving an alternative perspective is illegal. Now, I don't want to get into a whole discussion about critical race theory here, but it's not something that you teach in primary schools or even in secondary schools. But she came out quite vociferously, I'll say. And one other Tory MP said it's un-British to teach these things in British schools. So you wonder how effective anything that they put up about the teaching of history is going to be. The other thing that has people skeptical is that in 2021, last year, the government guidance on impartiality in schools was published. And although it doesn't directly address the teaching of racial justice issues in schools, it has left some head teachers questioning where the boundaries lie when teaching about race and racism. So when Kemi Badenoch said that teaching CRT in schools is illegal, she said using terms like white privilege is the guidance is that it mustn't be done. So at the moment, the government guidance includes things like that, but people don't know. And my understanding is that some head teachers want to stay away from the topic completely because they don't know where the boundaries are, what they can and can't say. And the government has specifically said that schools have to be careful who they bring in to do this training, and that there has to be impartiality at all levels. Well, I mean, I think people are afraid of overstepping the mark, of doing the wrong thing. So there are question marks over this. So as I say, whilst they're saying we're going to do this, they've also imposed these other guidelines, which are saying something slightly different. Okay, Gloria, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next one. New national framework for police powers, including stop and search, with greater scrutiny at local level. And they want to give greater clarity and context to stop and search data. They're saying in the report, they want to protect the ethnic minority communities from random stop and search procedures. But alongside this aim, of introducing a framework for the scrutiny of police powers, the government is now introducing something called the Serious Violence Reduction Order, which is in effect a new stop and search order. So once again, we're being told that this is the intention, but the legislation that's coming in is possibly contradictory. And because everything is so vague, we don't really know yet where the government stands on this. And I think more generally speaking, the government seems to be blind to how its additional pending legislation will disproportionately affect ethnic minority communities. And I'm talking in particular about the police crime sentencing bill. Is CARJ doing something on that one? That's probably very worth attending. So the police crime sentencing bill and the proposed overhaul of the Human Rights Act. These are two things, two pieces of legislation that could disproportionately impact negatively on ethnic minority communities. But we're hearing that the government is trying to do the right thing by these communities. So again, we have to be careful, and it is all very nuanced. So we just have to try and see what is really behind it all. Okay, Gloria, the next one, please.
5 minutes, Margaret Ann.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm almost there. What's the next one? Okay, no, you know what? Gloria, keep going, please. I'm going to skip this because this is too complicated. I think we'll go right to the next. We'll go to the end now, and we can come back to these. Thanks, Yogi, for pointing that out. Again, please, the next, okay. So the action plan, and this is what was in Kebby Badenoch's introduction, provides a template for the rest of the public sector, as I read to you before. So when we go out into our breakout rooms, what I'd like you to consider, a lot of people felt that the CREG report took us back. And as I say, Doreen Lawrence said it took the racial justice cause back 20 years. This response to it seems to be trying to diffuse some of it. What I didn't say, and I should have said, is that it sidestepped the question of institutional racism completely. So we have had this, you know, there is no institution, well, not there is none, but it's highly overused, it's triggering, we shouldn't talk about institutional racism. And then this report, although it's putting things nicely, it has not dealt with that. It hasn't rebutted that, it hasn't challenged it in any way. So the question I'd like you to have kind of an overarching question, or questions to go in to your breakout rooms with, is on matters concerning racial justice, are we truly heading towards a truly inclusive Britain? Are we on course, which is a quote from the report, are we on course towards a more inclusive and integrated society? And if yes, why? What's giving you optimism? And if no, why do you feel pessimistic about it? So, I mean, there's a lot to cover. And I'd just like you to think about it and discuss how you feel. If anybody's read the report, if you have any questions about the report, I'm happy to take them or to look at them in the chat while you're in the breakout rooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret Ann. We'll now go into our into the breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and then we'll return for a plenary session. Please remember to put whatever you want into the chat so that Margaret Ann can see those.
Before you go,
Gloria?
let me just say that I will put the questions in the chat as well. So hopefully you can see it while you're in the chat, in the breakout rooms. I'm not sure if it does reflect, but if you could just read the questions. Oh, actually, yes, I'll put it in the chat so you can see them while you have your discussions. Okay.
Hoping that everybody's ready with questions. Now, we didn't say which group is group number 1 or which group is number 2, but I think Gloria can see all of you. So if you put up your hand, and I know Bill is going early and one other that's going early. So if any of you who need to leave early would like to ask a question before you go, or would like to make a comment before you go, please go ahead. Bill?
Bill,
You're muted, Bill.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, it's great. We're on the trouble is we're on the surface. We're beginning the journey of discussion, meeting as a group and speaking frankly to each other. So it's a good start, but we ain't going to solve everything in 20 minutes or 10 minutes discussion. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's true. The idea is that we have these 7 talks, and it's like you say, Bill, it's the beginning of educating ourselves, really, to get a little more information and to be able to share that with everybody around. Because I think we learn from one another. Everybody reads the same document, but everyone picks up something different. And so we can share those. Thanks, Bill. So we'll go to the first group, whoever was in the first group. If somebody from the first group would like to come and say what you discussed or what you'd like to bring to the rest of the group, please.
Well, I was in group one. I didn't take any notes or anything like that. I think we were just opening up the conversation about what we were seeing. First of all, about the question itself. The question is, in a sense, quite a hard question, because an inclusive society includes all of us, and we don't see society as inclusive in the first place. There's a lot of poverty here, and it's to do with white people. So, in other words, you know, what does the government mean by an inclusive society? The second thing, observation I had was that I think we have to, as churches and faith groups, take action ourselves to describe, in a sense, doing it, what we mean by inclusive society, rather than dealing with reports, which I think seem to be, well, the government seems to work on the fact that they can put out reports and then nothing happens later on. I did mention just now that in terms of the Ukrainian refugees, and there was a comment about how there was a different reaction to Ukrainian refugees coming to Britain as opposed to people from ethnic minority groups in other parts of the world. That Caritas Social Action Network has asked for people to give information, tell stories about what happens to the Ukrainian refugees here. But we're very poor as a Catholic community in getting that information back to the centre in order to have the conversation with government, which we are having. But apparently we're one of the denominations that really hasn't got a lot of informational clout about the reality on the ground. And we need to be far more active in sort of feeding the policymakers and others who are having these conversations with information that helps to back up what they're saying. Otherwise, they're just talking to the policy, as it were, rather than to evidence of practice. I don't know whether others in the group want to have a comment about anything they were saying. Yogi, the other thing is, how many groups are there?
There are 3 groups.
3 groups, okay.
Anybody else in Jim's group that wants to say something, add to what Jim has just said?
We have Fred Ashmore, his hands are up.
Yes,
Fred?
yes, thank you. Yes. The comment which really resonated for me was someone saying it's very hard to express a view that there is improvement. Now, what I've heard in Quakers, we're what's called a left-wing echo chamber, and the suggestion that there's any improvement would not be tolerated, or rather it would be with streams of abuse. And it's hard to be dispassionate about these very emotive issues. It really is, and I offer that one because it has some meaning to me.
Thanks, Fred. Should we go to group 2?
Were
Gloria,
we group 2, Mary?
go ahead, Anne.
There were only 2 of us in our group, but the first thing we sort of raised was in sort of today's situation, what is white privilege? Who are the white privileged? That was just one point. And then we also noted the very different reaction to the Ukrainian refugees and the way that they're accepted and people are welcoming them. We both were living in situations that weren't ethnically mixed. And so there was a lot of ignorance and a lot of misunderstanding of the problems of inherent in racism. And people would say they're not racist, but really they were, a lot of people are racist, simply because they don't have a wide ethnic mix within their own community. And if you don't know, you believe what you hear and you believe the rhetoric and the narrative, and it's hard if you are in that situation. Yeah, sorry, I was just talking about my town. We have Chesterfield Against Racism, which is a very active group. It's a secular group where there's some church people going. But we had a meeting last week and we were horrified. The only ethnically diverse place in the whole town is the hospital, where the staff are very ethnic mixed. And what horrified the people at the meeting was the amount of abuse that the staff get from the patients who are coming in for help. And because the community in the hospital doesn't reflect the community in which these people, a lot of people live. So that was seen as a major problem.
I wonder if Margaret Ann would like to respond to Anne's first question. What is white privilege, Margaret Ann?
Yeah, I mean, these are terms that I think are we have to use sort of carefully. And I think generally it does not mean, because I know people say, but I've had no privilege. I come from a working class background. I've had a difficult time, but of different things. I think it doesn't refer to the fact that you are privileged materially. It refers to the fact that if you are a Black man in a certain area at a certain time, there's just an assumption. People will hold their bags a little closer to themselves. People may cross the street. People may do things. You can, as a white person, you can walk more freely.
Yes, I understand that. What I'm questioning is the use of the term.
Yeah, yeah.
We have the privilege because we're, you might say, we're of this place almost. But I think using the term white privilege is not necessarily helpful anymore among people who don't really know the meaning of the term.
Yes, yes. And I think there is a lot of misunderstanding about the term.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else in Anne's group that would like to say anything? Nalini?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Nalini. I thought Anne said you were in her group. Who was in Anne's group? Mary?
Mary, yes. No, I don't want to add anything. I think we've said white privilege was my real question, because I'm from Ireland, and that has often caused, well, I've often felt outside because of that. And I would also think very poor people, people from other nationalities who are white, but they come from different nationalities and different places, they can feel isolated as well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things in that for me. I think white privilege,
It's what Margaret Ann said at the beginning. We have to really listen to the language that we're using.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in different contexts, it can
That's
be helpful, but in
Yes.
some,
Yes.
it can be very destructive. Yes.
Yes.
I would claim that there is such a thing as white privilege.
That's a whole nother discussion.
No, certainly is, Margaret Ann. Even for the poorest white person with very little material goods, and if you put him or her alongside the richest, most wealthy, most academic of Black people, there would be white privilege. I mean, you've already discussed the whole Ukrainian thing. The Ukrainians do not have the language. Some of them don't have any material goods, but they have white privilege. The British have welcomed them. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of people opening up their homes to welcome the Ukrainians in. We did not have that with the Syrians. We did not have it with the North Africans. And to me, what more examples, how many more examples do you need for white privilege?
Okay, what time will I ring back?
I'm speaking now. Hello?
Mary, hello.
Yogi, I'd like to say that when I came over as a child from Ireland,
yes, Jim,
we experienced racism.
Oh,
When I arrived in
absolutely.
London,
Yeah.
There were signs up in many of the windows saying no blacks, no whites, and no dogs. No, sorry,
That's
no blacks,
correct.
no Irish.
No
Irish.
And that still maintains. It doesn't matter whether you're white coming from any other European country, because you don't really have privilege when it comes to a prejudice that is innate in a community that we are coming into. What we have to
I
do.
totally accept that, Jim. Remember, I'm married to an Irishman, and when I first came, I remember my brother-in-law living in Balham and right next door to him, and there was a fear of my husband and I going to visit him because he was renting a room, and that the landlord wouldn't want him there because he had a sister-in-law who wasn't white. So and he was an Irishman. And very often people will say, I'm white, but as soon as I open my mouth, they know that I'm not British.
Yes.
Now, all of that is accepted, but I still say, if you put it in on a straight line with anyone who is of color, you'll still find that even the Irishman who is not fully accepted as being a white British person, he would still have the benefit over a black person. And I have many reasons for saying that. I'm watching the time, and I think I will go to group 3. Nali, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, so slightly away from what group 3 was saying, I guess, but just with that white privilege, I think sometimes it's such an important topic because it's not meant as a guilt trip to anyone.
No.
I think it's there to help the conversations. I have privilege just by speaking English. That's like a majority language in the world, or living in a city. Sometimes that gives me more privilege than when I was living in the countryside, say. And we all have different bits. I think it's just helpful to know our privilege, because then it's not to make you feel bad about it, but then there's that responsibility. Okay, I recognize I have the privilege of being based in London. When I organize events, do I make sure that they are accessible for other people in other parts of the country, say? And so I think sometimes people get worried about the white privilege, but I do think it's a really helpful word, and these terms, I know they're new words for us a lot of the time, but they can be really helpful at explaining things. And you can imagine for like an ethnic minority coming to England, having to learn the language, they've got a lot more to learn. So sometimes it's hard for us to get used to, we are a privilege in that we have a language that we feel comfortable with. Suddenly having to learn new terms can be quite tricky. I do think they help with dialogue. So yeah, I just want to say that.
Thanks, Nalini. We literally have 2 minutes and we have not heard from group 3. Anyone from group 3? Mark, were you in group 3?
I was in group 3.
Oh, lovely, Sue.
There is a problem with the term privilege, but if you like, I could demonstrate it in my arrival in Britain as a student. It didn't really occur to me that I would be discriminated against. I might have had some anxieties about how I would fit in, but I never thought that I would have to somehow justify myself. I just assumed I would be absorbed into the student population. And I think that was very different from if I had been Black. There would have been all sorts of, barriers put up, or just lack of confidence, perhaps, on the part of those people to join in. And I don't know how people viewed me as being I think I was the only white person in what was then called the West Indian Society, because we used West Indian rather than Caribbean. Maybe thought that when people saw me mingling with all these others and, on grad weeks and things like that, they probably thought I was a bit weird or something. I don't know. But, I was just used to fitting in because I came from Trinidad where we mixed. But I'm sure I had a much easier time than the other Black students.
Thanks, Sue. Mark, were you going to say something?
Thank you, Yogi. Yeah, no, I've been silent because I'm just trying to soak it all in, really. There's just so much to learn. But I was saying in our group, and I offer this up for what it's worth, but you know, as the Chief Executive of Marriage Care, we're a national counselling service, relationship counselling service across the country, and I'm encouraged by, I was looking at some stats today that show the diversity of the clients we're reaching. Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know how we're managing it. You know, only 58% of our clients coming for counselling are white British, or categorise themselves as white British. And that compares to the census, which is about 80%, you know, so something's working. I wonder if it's about the training our counsellors have in unconditional positive regard for the other. But yeah, I'm just really fascinated, and again, the whole issue of language, you know, is so important. You know, so I really appreciate the discussion about white privilege, because that's taken me to a new place with regard to that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to say a very big thank you to everybody now, because we did promise that we would finish dead on 6 o'clock, and it is gone 6 o'clock. I just have a plea to all of you. This was the first of 7 talks. You would notice from the ad that we sent out to you, you know, you would all have got an email giving you the dates and times of the next 6. I'd really appreciate it if you would invite friends and family, or anyone you think that might be interested in any of these topics, to come along to any of our talks. And if we can be of help in any way to your associations, to your agencies, to continue with, you know, let's take the Sewell report. If there is anything that you want to do, particularly with your own group of people, we'd be very happy to help in whatever small way we can. And I think on that note, I want to say a very big thank you to Margaret Ann for giving up the time to prepare for tonight. So we'll clap you, Margaret Ann, even though you can't hear us. And thank you very much to Richard for all the organization he puts into getting these talks going, and to Gloria for all the administration that she has done. And a very big thank you to all of you for attending. I hope you're all going to have a good evening. God bless.
Thank you. Bye.
Is that okay, darling?